And whoopsie, youpsie, youpsie, and give-a-give-a-give-a-fry.
May I tuck in?
Why, certainly.
Boys will be boys.
Woo!
I'm gay! That's about it. That's the only way you can define it.
Good evening. Welcome to another episode of Dorby's Classic Cinema. Live from the newly renovated Dorby's Cinema Studios, I am your guest host, Pamela Prayer, filling in for your regular host, Jack Scalfani, who is unable to be with us tonight because just this morning he witnessed a double rainbow. And at time of recording, he remains outdoors, steadfastly rage-tweeting at the sky for going woke. Tonight, we bring you the first openly gay love story known to cinema history. But before we do, a simple question. When do you think this film was made? For that matter, where? It may not surprise you to learn that this film was co-written by a prominent gay rights advocate, a doctor who studied the prevalence of homosexuality across global cultures and felt compelled to advocate for equal rights as he noticed a sad prevalence of self-harm among his gay patients. It likely also will not surprise you to know that this doctor spoke publicly and lectured on sexual matters, teaching that homosexuality was normal and natural, and that he himself was in fact gay. It may surprise you, however, to learn that this doctor began his research and advocacy in Imperial Germany, before the full-length motion picture was even an available form of entertainment. The doctor in question is Magnus Hirschfeld, who as part of his advocacy work co-wrote a film along with the prolific director Richard Oswald, a film called Anders als die Andern, different from the others, released in May 1919 in Germany. Now, if you know your dates in history, you know that this is not even a full year after the surrender of the German Empire in World War I. And knowing where Germany is headed in the near future, it may seem an inopportune time for two Jewish men to be promoting civil rights in the German cinema. But a quick glance into film history helps us make sense of this. You see, in between Kaiser's Germany and Kanye's Germany was the Weimar Republic, a first attempt at democratic reform and governance that, despite gaining some success, would ultimately succumb to political instability, economic anxieties, and right-wing aggression. While it is perhaps mostly known as a footnote about a failed state in some history textbooks, culturally, the Weimar Republic is known to film historians as the golden age of German cinema. Many of the most influential actors, creatives, directors of the silent film era and early talkie period are in Germany. The influences of the golden age of German cinema reverberate throughout global cinema history up to the present day. Here we have foundational, first-of-their-kind examples of how to make a big-budget science fiction film, how to make a stylistic, creepy horror film, how to make a thrilling crime drama,
Du hast aber einen schönen Ball.
and so on. The censorship that was emblematic of imperialist Germany and later fascist Germany was weakened during this period. Initially, it was even completely repealed, and it was during this free, censorship-less period that Different from the Others was created. However, a severe backlash to this film and others resulted in a return to some forms of censorship about a year after Different from the Others was released. Different from the Others featured in Dr. Hirschfeld's long-running campaign to overturn Paragraph 175, a section of German law that penalized male homosexual acts as criminal. With homosexuality punishable as a crime, it was convenient for actual criminals to extort and blackmail men that they threatened to out as gay. And that is the plot of tonight's film. Two men fall in love, and despite their best efforts to live a normal, happy life together, they are followed, they are harassed, and they are blackmailed to tragic ends. Dr. Hirschfeld himself appears in the film several times, giving lectures on homosexuality that serve more as educational aids for the audience than they do as plot devices. As we now approach viewing the film itself, a friendly reminder that we are witnessing the brave work of activists from more than a century in the past. Even without controversy or attempts by fascist regimes to destroy them, most films from this era, most contemporaneous films too different from the others, are gone, completely lost to history. That we have any fragments of this film at all is something of a small miracle, and one that we will discuss further later. So please keep this all in mind as we begin our observation of Different from the Others.
Let the Golden Girls brighten your daytime every weekday on NBC.
Well, I have to admit, I don't understand these kinds of feelings. But if I did understand, and if I were, like you, I think I'd be very flattered and proud that you thought of me that way.
Thank you, Rose. It's enough.
Lilith Fair, the concert event that qualifies as the first of its kind.
And there's no kidding around what good musicianship is going on here.
Sarah McLachlan, Sheryl Crow, Sean Colvin, Jewel, Meredith Brooks, Indigo Girls,
Lilith Fair. It's a celebration of great music. It is awesome.
Because it's all girls.
Bring the most talked about concert of the summer into your living room. Lilith Fair on Direct Ticket.
What's for dessert? Dessert? I forgot. Need a quick dessert? Take the shortcut. The strawberry shortcut. Take a donut. Place it in a serving dish. Marinate with cherry 7-Up. Sweeten it with jelly. Add fresh strawberries. And whipped topping. That was quick. I took the shortcut. The strawberry shortcut.
As you can see, what we have of the film is clearly fragmented. But this is not like the typical case of silent films where degradation over time causes the film to fall apart. No, you see, about 1 year after its release, renewed national censorship laws put a ban on showings of Different from the Others. The only people who could see it after that point were medical professionals in a private screening. Now, Hirschfeld did try to work around this. Some years after its first release, he tried to re-release Different from the Others, but in the second go, he cut it up. He shortened it, and he put it inside of a documentary that he called Laws of Love. Laws of Love, unfortunately, would also succumb to a ban, but not before it was released in the USSR, specifically Ukraine. This is important, because a few years after that, fascists would take over completely and try to destroy all media they found subversive, including anything that had a positive portrayal of gay or lesbian people. This included, of course, Different from the Others, and they would have succeeded in destroying every copy of the film, but for the one version that got released in Ukraine. This copy resurfaced many years later in the 1970s, and the USSR returned it to Germany, and the City Museum of Munich restored it. And it is that City Museum of Munich restored version that we are watching tonight.
Saturday on Golden Girls, Rose gets some bad news.
This is terrible.
Listen, I'm Sam Beckett. My time travel experiment went haywire. Now I leap into other people's bodies. I feel everything they feel. This turtle is killing me.
Quantum Leap. You never know where you'll turn up, except Wednesdays on NBC.
You mean that, Blanche? Because Doug loves me for what I am, not for what he wants me to be or wishes I were.
I guess I deserve that.
I guess you do.
Well, Clay, this is very difficult for me. I still can't say I understand what you're doing, but I do intend to try to respect your decision to do it. I want you to be happy.
I am happy, Blanche.
I know.
This is tasty. Yeah.
What is it? Huh?
Shh. It's a surprise. Pickle surprise. Pickle surprise. Take an English muffin. Spread sandwich spread. Plop the ham dusty, please. Where's the pickle? That's the surprise. Pickle surprise.
No water?
You've got a big thirst and you're gay. Reach for a cold, tall bottle of Schmidt's Gay.
I think I'm gonna like this.
Yeah.
It's easy to look back at the violent fascist forms of censorship carried out during the Third Reich and point that out as an example of backwards governance, stifling civil rights and artistic freedom. But similar problems actually existed in Hollywood around the same time. Not as severe, of course, but artistic freedom was not the reality. During the Prohibition era of the late 1920s and early 1930s, entertainment in the United States went through a period known as the Pansy craze. And yes, then as now, pansy was a derogatory term for effeminate men. You can guess what this craze entailed. Yeah, LGBTQ performers and themes were growing in popularity, especially in speakeasies and underground venues. But that popularity was starting to bleed into more mainstream forms of entertainment, even in Hollywood films and Broadway.
Don't forget, plenty of room in there. Oh, sir, here's where you need the room. Such a muscle.
The most well-paid performer on Broadway in this area was a gay man, a cross-dresser named Gene Mallon.
What kids ain't my type, but you're all right.
Say, you can be had.
Frankie and Johnny both sweethearts. How they good love.
Come on, sugar. Everybody likes you. Why don't you be a good kid, huh?
Well, broken handsome, why don't you come up and sing us sometime?
Who had started gaining prominence in the circles that would develop the pansy craze as a young man, a seamstress making costumes for drag balls. Drag balls, yes. In the early 20th century, there were dances where men danced with men and women danced with women, and these traditions have a history that goes back much further It's nothing new. So you might wonder, with the growing popularity of the Pansy craze and drag performers like Jean Mallon, why don't we see more LGBTQ themes and performers in the films of the Great Depression era and beyond? What happened? Well, not everyone was excited to see these kinds of people gain prominence in entertainment, especially not religious conservatives who pushed for forms of censorship against Hollywood. There was a great scare that Hollywood films and popular entertainment would corrupt the youths. This has never changed. And state by state, in more conservative parts of the United States, lawmakers were seeking to enact censorship against Hollywood films. And from the perspective of a filmmaker wanting to craft a film to be viewed on a nationwide audience, having to deal with state-by-state differences in censorship laws was a potentially daunting task. And with the ever-pressing threat that the U.S. Congress might take this up and enact a national form of censorship laws, Hollywood decided to take matters into its own hands to avoid the law by self-regulating. In order to self-regulate it, they looked to proposals pushed forward by a man named William Hayes. He was a prominent Republican figure in the 1920s and a Presbyterian church elder. The Hayes Code, as it came to be called, was a form of self-censorship that put a severe restriction on what could be shown in Hollywood films. It was in effect from the 1930s up into the 1960s. During the roughly 3 decades that the Hayes Code was in effect, this meant no prominent gay characters, no prominent gay themes, no mixed-race couples, no insults to clergy, limits on profanity, among many other restrictions. But in the silent film era and the few years of talkies that we had before the Hayes Code came into effect, gay themes and characters were not that unusual. The film ends on a tragic note for the main character, along with a plea to sympathize and help to prevent the same tragedy befalling upon others like him. The actor who played this tragic figure, Conrad Veidt, did not succumb to the same fate as the protagonist because, well, frankly, he probably wasn't gay. Now, people who knew him in the early German art scene did say he might have fancied both men and women, but publicly he only married women. 3 times, in fact. And it was that third and last time that he at last found the love of his life, a woman he described as a miracle. And unfortunately, for this time and place in history, she was also Jewish. And so they chose, for obvious reasons, to leave Germany. He learned English and continued acting in England and then later in Hollywood, where he would land a role in a small film you may have heard of called Casablanca.
Get away from that phone. I would advise you not to interfere.
Eagle-eyed film buffs may also recognize Veidt from the intro to this very program. That's him from the foundational horror film The Cabinet of Dr. Kali... can never remember... The Cabinet movie. He was in that. And DC Comics fans may recognize him as the face that inspired the comic book artist to design Batman's most famous villain. The director of Different from the Others, Richard Oswald, also fled for his own safety and would also continue working in film, albeit nothing on the level of Casablanca. After the war, eventually he was able to return to Germany, where he was able to live out the rest of his life peacefully until he passed at the age of 82. And as for Dr. Magnus Hirschfeld, he also, thankfully, was able to avoid the increasing persecution of Jews and gays in Germany, making use of his global speaking tours as opportunity to scout and prepare for life outside of Germany. He would ultimately end up in France, where he continued his research and publications, writing not only of his experiences and studies on human sexuality, but also a rebuttal of long-standing and widely accepted racist pseudoscience beliefs. He posited that the violence of the Nazi Party was not an outlier in Western societies, but rather an extreme version of prejudices that already existed within Western cultures. He passed away from a heart attack at the age of 63, still in France, several years before the German invasion, and several more years before the liberation of his homeland. The Weimar Republic offered a brief glimpse of hope. Amid the cultural flourishing of the era, paragraph 175, the law criminalizing homosexuality, faced increasing scrutiny. Leftist parties and the government sought to repeal it, and a committee in the German parliament actually did vote to repeal paragraph 175, but conservative political parties severely opposed this move. With the rise of Nazi politics in the early 1930s, any actual effort to repeal paragraph 175 fell flat. And as the fascists came to power, homosexuals became a targeted, persecuted minority group. With the liberation of Germany at the end of World War II, unlike other groups, homosexuals were not liberated. Because of paragraph 175, they were still considered criminals under the law, even democratic law. And so they had to carry out the full term of the sentences that were implemented against them under the fascist government. But in the years to follow, in both East and West Germany, paragraph 175 would get weakened. And finally, under a fully unified Germany in 1994, the government would remove it from the books. In the years to follow, you would see increasing rights for same-sex couples in Germany, as well as public recognition of the troubles that LGBTQ persons have experienced throughout German history. And finally, in 2017, the government voted to give full pardons to men convicted under paragraph 175 in the past, and full marriage and adoption rights to same-sex couples. And so we see, from the beginning of film history and before, we have had gay writers, directors, and performers and their allies willing to join together for the common good, whether society was ready to join them or not. And we thank you for joining us this evening and sharing in this moment of classic LGBTQ cinema history. If you enjoyed this video and would like to support the channel, please be sure to subscribe, or at least to leave a comment with your thoughts on the video. As always, I have been Pamela Prayer, filling in for Jack Scalfani, who is still alive. Make sure to tune in next week when we cover the first cinematic depiction of a love story between a hectically busy city girl and the simple country boy who repairs her car and her heart.